unconsenting people, to look at the brain effects, using hypnosis and a number of other psychological means for influencing behavior on American citizens without their consent. They were opening U.S. mail, they were infiltrating anti-war movement groups, all within the boundaries of the United States, on American citizens. Going back to the atomic age, you can think back on the tests that were conducted in Nevada at a time when they wanted to see what the effects of radiation would be on servicemen exposed to high levels of radiation. The military knew what many of those effects would be, and they knew, in fact, that many of those effects would be bad. Yet they went forward, sacrificing the few for what they believed was in the interest of the many, again, without consent. In Alaska, during the same period of time into the 50s, what was occurring there was the injection of radioactive materials in Alaska Native populations. Now, this in the last few weeks have been the subject of committee hearings in Washington, D.C., because the indigenous people of Alaska have launched a $400 million lawsuit against the federal government because, once again, they didn't ask for consent. They just went ahead and did it because they wanted to see how people living in northern regions would react to radioactive exposures. Now, these are just a few of the instances. Many other instances occur in our history where the question of the government's true intentions always need to be in the forefront of Americans. In terms of this particular technology as it applies to HAARP, would the military engage in mind control technologies or behavioral change technologies on American populations? I think the answer to that is spoken best by Zbigniew Brzezinski, because his belief was absolutely yes. The only way that this kind of technology wouldn't be used in that way is with sufficient outcry by populations within the United States. Now, I want to draw your attention to a more recent document, a document put together by the United States Army, by the Strategic Studies Institute of the United States Army, and it's called The Revolution in Military Affairs and Conflicts Short of War. What this document shows and what it reveals is the idea that the technologies are advancing so rapidly in the military circles that it's behind the value structure of Americans. In other words, it doesn't line up with what we believe is correct and right for our government to be engaged in. The examples they give are new weapon systems that are capable of disabling aircraft at a distance, such as HAARP, where you can take down an aircraft with using radio frequencies and other radiations, microwave radiations, take out the avionics of an aircraft, causing it to crash. And they suggest that this might be useful in fighting terrorists and drug trafficking in the United States. And while most of us would agree that these activities certainly run counter to the best interest of the American population, what we would not agree on is that the idea of convicting and executing people who are thought to be breaking the law is an appropriate approach. I mean, in our country, we believe in due process of law, where someone's accused of a crime, brought to trial, tried and convicted by a jury of their peers. What we don't support in this country is the execution of people without fair trial. Now, if we have this technology that can take aircraft out, we certainly have the technology to track them to when they land and properly bring those people to justice, if in fact they're criminals. What happens if the plane we interdict in that instance just carries a group of tourists and the government denies knocking it out? It's not the kind of technology we'd like to see. And those are examples that are given in the Revolution in Military Affairs, Conflicts Short of War, which is a relatively recent document. Going a little further on that same line, we can talk about the idea of this technology being applied for other purposes. Within that document, they talk about the technological advances being similar to the changes between the invention of gunpowder and where the modern age of weaponry began. But when you look back on some of the technological applications and advancements, one of the other areas that they just explore in that government document, that U.S. Army document, is the use of transponders, of implants under the skin of servicemen for the specific use of tracking them if they're captured in a combat situation. And well, for servicemen, that may be a very useful technology and one that they would like available to them, and certainly they should have the right to choose that. But they go a little further, and they talk about the use of that technology for on business travelers traveling abroad, on the idea that once you cross over the boundaries of the United States, that maybe you'll get in a situation where you'll want to be extracted from a hostile environment with so many conflicts across the planet. Well, this may again be the case, It's something that should be chosen individually because the ability to track people is, again, a violation of what we consider a right to privacy. But dropping back to mind control technologies for one moment, think about the idea of mind control technologies changing your behavior. Think about the First Amendment, the idea of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of the press. All require first freedom of thought, freedom to feel what it is that you intend to feel, and not something imposed on you from some external force out of your control. What bothers me most about the revolution in military affairs is that the United States Army, in disclosing all of these technologies, then lays out sort of a scenario for how to change American values to more closely correlate to the introduction of new weapons technologies. This is not the role of the United States Army or any other branch of government. Their role is to reflect American values, not to create them, to implement new technology advancements. The problem with this whole area, the HAARP technology specifically, it's a very large delivery system. We've talked about numerous applications of that new weapon system. Some, all of us can agree, would be highly useful. Others, much more sinister, and the kinds of things that we really ought to question. The problem is it's not being adequately debated. The reason this video was made was to bring this issue to a lot more people so people could begin debating these very, very important issues. Some of the other things that we need to talk about in the course of this technology is some of the more positive applications. And if we talk about some of those positive applications as we roll on, there's a couple of things that we've missed in disclosing some of the other things that can happen in terms of this technology. When you think about the focusing capability, which we've talked about, and that amount of delivered energy reaching the ionosphere, and then you think about the amplification from the ionosphere, from these nonlinear events which we've described, but then you think about it in one more sort of scenario. The magnetic lines of force around the planet follow very defined lines, and they come closest to the planet, closest to both the north and south poles. Interjecting energy into these naturally occurring lines may also create a nonlinear effect, a very large effect. It can be thought of as hitting the acupuncture points of the planet. Our concern is right now the planet's undergoing significant change, releases of energy that are being manifested in obscure, unusual weather patterns, by way of example. It's also being displayed when you think of energy releases from the planet in volcanic activity and earthquakes, which are increasing in the terms of earthquakes in frequency, size, again demonstrating an energy release. Now what the HAARP program planners will tell you is not to worry. What we're doing with HAARP is a small amount of energy. But what we're suggesting is that small amount of energy, if it's resonated at just the right frequency, in just the right way, entering into those critical acupuncture points of the planet, that you may be able to create a huge nonlinear effect. And the question becomes is, how close are we to the last straw on the camel's back of what our planet can handle in energy releases? Have we already passed that point, and what we're seeing is just a continual release? And are we now going to inject even more power in the billions of watts range that's coherent, that's uniquely oriented to hit specific frequencies? Another particular point along this line is the Earth that was discovered resonates at 7.83 hertz, or cycles per second. That's well within the range of the operating frequencies of HAARP. What happens if they strike that note or play that HAARP in just the right way as to resonate with that frequency? Would it cause the kinds of things that Nikola Tesla envisioned back in the early 1900s? What he envisioned were very destructive forces being released. Or would it, in the more modern times, more closely resemble the ideas of non-linear effects that J.F. Gordon MacDonald from UCLA envisioned, which was the input of a small amount of energy that could release enormous amounts of energy across the planet? These are questions that haven't been adequately asked, and we believe can't adequately be modeled by computer models or the kind of models that universities and military establishments would seek to utilize. The problem here is we're talking about a system that has the potential for damaging our ionosphere, which belongs to the planet. It's what keeps this life happening on this planet. It has the potential for creating huge physiological effects in populations as either a side effect or an intentional effect of the science. All of these things need to be explored. There are no biological scientists attached to the front end of this project. Much different than the Chariot project of the past where they wanted to detonate thermonuclear weapons. It was the biologists that said, hey, wait, this is damaging, this is not a healthy thing. In terms of this technology,